Well, I'm still sort of digesting the last set of comments and thinking that some of those really describe Mozilla very well, in that we are trying to build solutions that live and succeed in the market, but we are not market-driven. And in fact, we credit many of the innovations that have come out of Mozilla and that built Firefox explicitly with not being driven by the logic of the market. We're odd in that we succeed by competing in the market, but the logic that drives us is quite different. And so we find that that is more fundamental to our identity than many people think, that it takes a while for people to understand it, and that when new people come and spend time at Mozilla, new employees when they join us or volunteers when they come to know the community, that the thing they comment on the most often is how the difference of not being driven by the logic of the market penetrates what we do. And so that's been fascinating to me, because to a consumer or the general user of Firefox, we build a product that looks better than the competition, and it all looks like a professional piece of software. But the closer you get to Mozilla, I think the more you find that the core logic of what we are and who we do and why we do it is quite different. And so we've had some success to date at bringing new things into the internet, new approaches and new styles. I think the conversations that we've had for the last few days make it clear we need more innovation. There's an awful lot going on. There are a lot of forces that tend towards centralization, towards silos, and that there are a few places that are thinking about how do we have a civil society online that's as rich as the economic society online. And we all need to be talking to each other and strengthen that aspect as well. So most people don't think of Mozilla as trying to build infrastructure of civil society, but we do. We view Firefox and all of the other things that we view as a tool towards a certain set of goals. And so I think it's very interesting that this is my slide, which captures my take on your talk. This is a description of Mozilla. You know, we're from the Valley, of course, where everything's about venture capital. Everything's about technology and making money. And we live in that world. But as we say, not every venture is about capital. The output, in our case, must look like that same logic, but it's very different going in. And so we have to think pretty much every day about what it means to be an organization that is not about capital or is not market-driven, but is competing in the market, one of these hybrid organizations. And so I'll tell you a little bit as we get a little more concrete about what we think about. We had Stevens talks about thinking about the network first. We also think about the individual, or the individual first. So I thought it was fascinating, your comments about the individual being so important, but smarter and better and more capable. Not necessarily higher IQ maybe, but more capable by being connected to the network. And so what we're trying to do at Mozilla is build technologies that build certain traits into the internet, so that the very fabric, the infrastructure itself, has within it the technologies and some of the values of decentralization, distributed decision-making, and also the personal aspect. And so, I've been trying to get to this gathering for a few years, and one of the things that's drawn me is the personal and personal democracy forum. Because one of the things that's of interest both to me personally and that drives Mozilla is how do we continue to have a personal? How do I matter? How does the dignity of the individual human being matter when we live in a network and we are one among billions? And one of the things that the network does, of course, is we can stack and layer and learn, but it also means that the unit of impact, in some cases, can get to be much larger. So currently, something like 450 million people use Firefox. We're, 30% of the market? So we're already talking about 1 billion people. And so what we find in technology decisions, when you get to the big structures, the really big networks, that it's not enough for you to know what you want. It's not enough for you to even be able to build what you want. In a highly networked system, it often requires that many, many people want what you want or build or use the same product that you want. So you could find a phenomenal product or a piece of technology, and many of them, if you're the only one using it, it's not going to work. The rest of the system or the rest of the network won't respond to it. And so in order to be personal, we have to be personal within this giant network. And so, in fact, that's one of the paradoxes that we set out to try and overcome with Firefox. That it has the layer, which is the layer that interacts with the network on your behalf, but it still remains highly personalized. And going forward, as we get into ever bigger networks, and as networks become part of our government system, I think this question of how do I maintain my control over my life in the middle of a network is going to become ever more important. And one response to that, I would say, is technology and networks that are also democratizing. And that's a little bit different than distributed. Distributed is part of that, but not all of it. And so by democratization, I don't mean democracy in the liberal Western sense. And I don't mean politics, and I don't mean Democratic or Republican. By democratization, I mean how much can each one of us get involved? And let's see, here we go. And the best, shortest handle is how much can we move from consumption to creation? Because it's a very different question to actually be able to create and influence the network or the interaction with the network. So I'll use the maple syrup event example. So that's a good distributed technology. Like anyone with 311 can dial into the system. That means anyone can participate. So anyone can consume some of the system, anyone can put some information in it. But the true question of democratization of that system is how much can you actually influence the system? Can you get the data back out of it? So for example, everybody dials into 311. What happens to that data stream? First, can I get it? Secondly, can I change the system? Maybe not the way the city uses, because the city's a user, but could I get the system? Could I change it? Could I use it differently? How much can I learn from that, and how much can I create? Because we often hear about the internet being an era of moving from scarcity to ubiquity. But often what we talk about is the ubiquity of consumption. All those websites are there, they're free. Data is there, it's free. That's consumption. And that's a real luxury. But at some point, what other people give you is not going to meet your needs. Like the government that we get when we do nothing, if we don't participate and we just see what happens to us, it's not the government that we want. And the same is true across a range of other networks and technologies. And so technology that's democratizing allows those of us who want to, when we want to move from consumption to creation. Now, especially in the days before open source, that sounded crazy. Like, why would anybody want to do that? Don't we just want to be couch potatoes and sit down, and it's so great that websites are free, and it's so great that I don't have to do anything, and people are going to give me all this stuff? And by the way, why would anybody ever work or do anything that wasn't for money? Well, it turns out that the number of us who aren't couch potatoes all the time, and the number of us who are actually willing to get up and make an effort to improve our lives or improve the lives of the people around us is much higher than we think. Or the number of people who might participate in activism or politics or government, which are non-monetary activities most of the time, is much higher than what people think. So the appetite for creation, the ability to have some control over my life, and the ability to create some of the technologies that govern it is much greater than people think. And so we see that in the open source movement. We see it in some of the big projects like Mozilla, but across the industry and across the academic world, the number of people who take work that they've done and make it available in open source and work with others and move towards creation is phenomenal. Like open source is a meme in computing now. So nobody ever expected that. And increasingly what the network allows us to do is have technologies and a technical infrastructure that has deep democratization possibilities. So sometimes people will say, does it matter? But we've heard this before. The idea of democratization, or that people are willing to actually work, or that people will join together in a voluntary sense. Will people share their work effort, and who cares? We've heard this in the technology space before. We heard it at Mozilla before. Before our great success with Firefox, we heard exactly this. We heard, oh, none of this matters. Oh, not enough people would get involved to make a change. And I don't really understand what you're talking about. Everything seems fine to me now, like what would be different, and life's not going to be any better. And then the great value of technology is you can make something with it concrete and put it in front of people. So we made Firefox, and we put it in front of people, and we said, well, this is why this kind of technology matters. First, it's a great product, but it has many of the aspects of democratization built into the core of it. And that's why it's been successful. Without that democratization, without using the network to make people more capable, we never could have built it. And if we hadn't have built that one, there wouldn't be any other browsers today. So there is sometimes a difficulty in conceiving or finding something new, like a technology that has democratizing tendencies. But keep looking, and the network is good at these things. Let me just go back. I got two here. So this is the only slide. Well, anyway. So what we're trying to do at Mozilla now is take those sets of goals and apply them to the new internet setting. Because, of course, things are pretty different now than they were 10 years ago, when what we call mobile now was much smaller, when websites were everything, and we didn't have sort of the app way of interacting with the world yet. And so what we are aiming to do is to take that spirit that enlivens Firefox, that it's about you and about your ability to have a great experience, but also to get in there and participate, and extend it across internet life. Because our networks, and so the network will be everywhere. I mean, the picture of the refrigerator is up there for a reason, right? The network will soon become far more ubiquitous than we can imagine today. And so this question of, great, how do you get into it, the information that you care about? How do you control the information about you in it? And how do you have the ability to move from consuming what other people give you to the creation of this fundamental aspect of life? Has a number of places that are at risk, and so we're trying to address those as we move forward. One of these, of course, is what about data? What about information particular about me? This is generally framed as privacy, which is a little narrow. Right? I mean, there's something about data that's wildly exciting. We are on the cusp of so many new things because we're just beginning to understand networks. That may be going too far. We're just beginning to experience these networks at scale. And so we'll see in the next few years things that we can't even imagine now. That means that there's a bunch of data. And so, for example, one of the things we're trying to do is articulate principles. Because since we live in the technology industry, we can see that it's hard to regulate things like privacy. How would you regulate it now? I mean, we're an organization that is fundamentally about an individual having control. That means control over my data. And even from that perspective, it's hard to imagine a piece of legislation that would be effective, that wouldn't stifle innovation, and that would have any meaning at all in 6 or 12 or 18 months. And so because we can't do that, we started by saying, well, what are some of the principles? And what are the principles that balance, I want to be in control of information about me. I don't want to be stalked when I'm online. I don't want to be manipulated. If I happen to live in a repressive government, I don't want to be surveilling myself on behalf of that government. That set of control. With, on the other side, there's a vibrant economic model for the web. It lives on ads. People seem to like ads because people follow ads. People respond to ads in the billions and billions and billions per month. So there's a vote with people with their activity that this content that's provided as sponsored links and ads is valuable. So we want to try and balance, boy, that's people are responding to that, with how do I have control? There's no real easy answer. So we at Mozilla, we always start with principles. We try to start from our mission that you're in control, that what happens to you should be something that if you knew it and understood it, you'd feel good about it. If you've got a product that you're using and as you start to understand it, it feels creepy to you, well, that's not Mozilla. So this is our current set of principles. Now, these are not radical when you look at them, but it turns out there aren't many people in the industry doing this. It's really shocking. Like we went to try and find an email provider so we could do some email communications. Very, very hard to find an email provider that can live up to these principles. I mean, it took us months, and we ended up, I think, with 2 choices, and out of all the providers in the world. And so we'll try and take principles like this, we'll try and make them more public, we'll see if we can push the industry towards adopting these as we find ways we can add the things into Firefox that give you the choice of making some of these choices when you're online. We'll do that. We'll do a bunch of experiments. But the question of how to get some user control and the richness of the web is pretty complex. So I hope that you'll sort of help us out with that when you see experiments about privacy or you see sort of new features, give them a try, give us some feedback. Our feedback mechanisms, as described, are not the easiest. We keep trying to improve them, but it's really important because this question of what's your experience and how do you both be safe and have fun and have the richness of the web are really complicated. We also try to bring this sense of democratization that's possible with the network to a range of other activities. And Firefox is great, and it's a very basic level. It's almost infrastructure. Not quite, right, because it's still the one place that can represent you as you travel around the web. It's a place where information about you can be applied to various different websites, and you can take some sense of identity with you to different apps or different websites. That's the future. But there's also a lot of other activities of which maybe governance and certainly politics may be one, but there's a range of other places where we think that our experience with Firefox and distributed systems and community and democratizing technologies might be relevant. And so we have a program called Drumbeat, where we try and bring these sort of democratization trends to other areas that seem ripe to them. And so that ranges from privacy icons. Can we, especially with a set of people here, maybe figure out some icons that might be useful, that this site sells your data, this site uses your data for all sorts of things but doesn't sell it, whatever it is. It ranges to trying to teach kids to hack, so that the generations that are growing up now understand that if you can't take it apart and you don't understand it and the only thing you can do is consume, you are ripe for manipulation. Turns out that computer science education of that type, at least anecdotally, appears to be declining. That a lot of the people who come to Mozilla now and are in their 20s grew up on hacking. But a lot of the people who are younger now, they grow up finding apps for their iTouches, but not hacking or doing anything with them. So that will change. I mean, that will change the nature of the world that we get. So one of these projects is about hacking. We're doing a fair amount with education. Like open, decentralized, democratized networks, how would that affect learning? Especially for the millions of people who will never have an opportunity to get to a college, probably not even a high school. Or for those of us who are out of school and still need to learn, why do we not use the network to learn and have communities and networks of learning? So we're doing a lot of work in that area as well. And then a lot of work in changing the nature of audio and video on the web. So today when we think of video, we generally think of YouTube. If you're technically oriented, you might think of Flash. All of that is like the Stone Age of what's possible visibly on the web, like what we can actually see and hear and experience and be immersed in on the web. We are absolutely on the cusp of that changing, as in the capabilities are there. They're in the modern browsers. We think Firefox leads, but they're increasingly in other modern browsers. These technologies can be open. We can have vast new ways of storytelling that we don't today, where the information and data is available. And if we do things right now, they will actually be open in that distributed fashion. So we have a bunch of activities going on in these areas of trying to take technology and working with filmmakers, working with educators, working with some of the other privacy organizations. This should bring it back.
Give her a last slide.
Maybe that'll bring it back. I'm at my 18 minutes and 3 seconds. Well, anyway, there was one more slide I wanted to have up there. But so there's a bunch of activities to take this idea of technologies of opportunities, technologies of participation, and ultimately of democratization, and try and apply them to other fields. You won't see Mozilla trying to apply them directly into politics or electoral politics. We're a global organization. We're actually more effective in many ways outside the United States than in the United States. Market share and the number of people who really resonate to the Mozilla mission, the number of people who are on board with using Firefox and they trust it, but the whole goals of Mozilla they understand turns out much greater outside the United States. And so we're very careful to talk about the values of the network, the values of shared code and community, and democratization, but we're not a politically active organization in the sense of politics. And I really would like to have my last slide, but I don't think I'm going to. But it's back to your network point again. It's anyway, we try to have we say .com brains live and compete. Excellent. Let me see if I can just. Was that my time marker? One other, okay, we'll pass through this one. So these are some of the other things that we're working on is to open technologies in journalism. So we have a partnership with the Knight Foundation to try and take what we know about technology and community and learning and bring some new ways of storytelling into journalism. Another one, for example, is content, translated content, crowdsourced translated content. I'm just going to go back, which is this one. A program, easy piece of technology, and trying to use that decentralized ability to get content out in many languages. And then I'm going to close because I know you're trying to get me off the stage. So this is what Mozilla is trying to do. You're really trying to get me off the stage here. So I guess I will go, and I will say that Mozilla is about trying to build individual empowerment into the web. And here we go. This is what we try and do. Our networked synthesis of .com brains, live and die in the market, which is what we do, but .org heart. Like, it's all about that. Thank you.